Cold air settles early in the Appalachian Mountains, slipping down the hollers before the sun is fully gone. Wood groans as cabins cool, and somewhere beyond the last fence line, a lantern flickers where no one claims to live. This hidden Appalachian story has been carried for generations, not spoken aloud, only felt, like a pressure in the chest when the forest goes quiet all at once. Imagine standing on a gravel road where the hills fold inward, listening to dogs bark and then stop. The wind moves through bare branches, not hurried, not loud, patient. Folks here know when to turn back. They know which paths to leave alone after dark. And they know that some places remember every footstep that ever crossed them. This isn't a tale told for entertainment. It's a warning passed with lowered eyes and half-finished sentences. A place where neighbors learn to look away. A valley where questions learn to die young. The mountains keep what they take, and what they keep doesn't always stay buried. Some secrets fade with time. This one learned how to wait. If stories like this find you late at night, you're not alone. Take a moment to like the video if the quiet tension feels familiar, and subscribe if you want more files that don't quite let go. Share it with someone who understands these hills. And tell me, where are you watching from? Trust me, what comes next stays with you. Let's continue, because this story only gets stranger. The road thins before it ends. Asphalt gives up first, then gravel, then the idea of a road at all. Tires crunch softer here, like they're being asked to keep a secret. The Appalachian Mountains don't announce their boundaries. They ease you across them. A mailbox leans. A fence sags. Cold air settles in the low places even when the ridges still hold light. People who live along these folds learn to read small signs. Which porch lights stay on past dusk? Which dogs bark once and then go quiet? Which hollers you pass through without stopping, even in daylight? It isn't fear exactly, more like an inherited courtesy. Don't disturb what's minding its own business. There's a place where the hills pull close enough to muffle sound. Step there, and you feel it in your ears, the way quiet presses inward. Wood creaks somewhere upslope, slow and deliberate, as if a house is stretching its bones. The wind comes down in narrow drafts, carrying the smell of damp leaves and iron. Folks say the mountains talk to each other at night. They don't mean words. They mean memory. Long before maps were tidy, families settled where water ran steady and the ground could be coaxed into crops. They built close to timber and farther from neighbors. Privacy wasn't a luxury. It was a method. You handled your own. You learned when to help and when to look away. That rule, look away, kept peace longer than any law. This hidden Appalachian story doesn't begin with a scream or a siren. It begins with avoidance. With the way eyes drop when a certain ridge comes into view. With directions that bend you around a valley rather than through it. Ask why, and you'll get weather talk. Ask again, and the answer thins to a shrug. Imagine standing there as night gathers, lantern glow catching on frost. The hills don't move, but they feel awake. Somewhere a dog pads across a porch and stops. You realize you've stopped breathing too. The thing about places like this is how ordinary they look when the sun is high. Laundry lines. Split logs stacked neat. A creek that laughs over stone. It's only later, when the shadows climb uphill instead of down, that the land shows its second face. Doors get shut earlier. Conversations shorten. Radios hum just loud enough to fill the space between thoughts. Old-timers will tell you the mountains keep accounts. Not in ledgers, more like grooves worn into rock. Every footstep adds a line. Every night leaves a mark. When something goes wrong, the land doesn't forget. It waits. That waiting changes people. It teaches patience, caution, and the wisdom of not naming things that might listen. There's a bend in the road where headlights cut across a stand of poplar and briefly reveal a clearing. Nothing stands there now. Nothing you could point to. But drivers slow anyway. The habit outlived the reason, and no one's in a hurry to break it. You don't rush through a place that feels like it's taking measure. Years ago, no one agrees how many. A few families chose to stay beyond that bend when others moved closer to town. They preferred distance. Preferred the way the night sounded uninterrupted. Most were like any others. Hard work, church on Sundays, suppers that stretched with whoever showed up hungry. One household, though, learned how to keep to itself so completely that even kindness stopped knocking. The sheriff came once, they say, or maybe twice. Stories differ, details slip. What doesn't slip is the end of the story. A car turning around before it reached the gate. No report filed. No follow-up. Just a gap where answers should be. Silence can be an action if everyone agrees to it. By the time the moon clears the ridge, the valley has settled into a listening posture. Crickets start, stop, start again. Somewhere far off, a board pops. You get the sense, not fear, not yet, that you've crossed into a ledger you didn't know existed. And once your name is written there, the mountains don't erase it. Families who settled deepest in these mountains learned early how to belong without being seen. They chose land where the soil was thin but loyal, where a creek ran cold even in August, where neighbors were a long walk and longer memory away. You measured distance not in miles, but in how long it took help to arrive and whether you wanted it to. Most households shared the same rhythms. Dawn chores, midday heat pressing down like a hand, supper bells drifting across hollers at different hours, each sound a small announcement of survival. Children learned boundaries before they learned letters. Don't cross that fence. Don't ask about that ridge. Don't wave at that house. It wasn't cruelty that taught those rules. It was history. People here carried stories like heirlooms, kept, not displayed. You could trace family lines by the way folks spoke about the past. Some did it freely, laughing through old hardships. Others kept their voices low, careful. The mountains had already taken enough. The household on the far side of the bend didn't fit neatly into any line. They arrived quiet and stayed quieter. No porch gatherings. No borrowed sugar. No children wandering the creek with the rest. Their land looked tended, but not welcoming. Fields cut too clean, fences mended too quickly. Even kindness, when it came, felt rehearsed. Church was the one place where everyone met on level ground. Hymns smoothed differences. Prayer folded them together. But even there, the family chose a back pew, eyes down, hands folded tight. After service, while others lingered to talk weather and crops, they slipped away as if the air itself urged them on. People noticed. Of course they did. Not with accusation, just with the quiet awareness that comes when patterns don't line up. In Appalachia, difference isn't a crime. It's a question, and unanswered questions have a way of growing roots. Time passed the way it always does here, slowly, then all at once. Seasons turned. Children grew. A few families packed up for flatter places. Still, that house remained. Still, no one went calling. When work needed doing near their line, men went in pairs. Not out of fear, they said. Out of respect. There were moments, though, that slipped through the careful order. A woman who swore she heard singing after midnight. Soft, wrong somehow, like the tune knew the words but not the feeling. A boy who came home pale, saying he'd followed a dog to the fence and lost track of time. An older man who refused to say why he stopped cutting timber near the ridge, only that his saw wouldn't start there anymore. These weren't stories told for effect. They were told once, maybe twice, then tucked away. No one chased them. No one built conclusions. The mountains don't reward curiosity when it's loud. What did spread was a change in behavior. Paths shifted. Play areas moved closer to home. When storms rolled in, people checked on each other, except that house. Not because they were forgotten, but because everyone agreed they didn't want checking. An Appalachian family doesn't earn distance overnight. It accumulates, like silt at the bend of a creek. Each small choice adds weight. Each avoided glance settles into place. Eventually, the current reroutes around it. By the time anyone thought to ask out loud what made that family different, the question felt old, stale, dangerous in its own quiet way. Better to let the mountains hold the answer. They had been doing that long before anyone arrived. As dusk settled, smoke curled from chimneys across the valley, thin, domestic, reassuring. From the far house, smoke rose too. Straight up, no drift, as if the air itself didn't want to carry it anywhere else. There are nights in the Appalachian Mountains when sound behaves differently. It doesn't travel the way it should. It gathers. Locals will tell you the hills can cup noise in their palms, hold it, then release it somewhere else entirely. On those nights, you might hear a door close that isn't yours, or footsteps pacing a ridge you can't see. It started with the quiet. Not peaceful quiet, intentional quiet. Crickets would fall out of rhythm. Frogs would answer once, then stop. Dogs that usually barked at shadows went still, tails tucked, eyes fixed on dark tree lines. Folks learned to notice when the night held its breath. One evening, a man heading home late paused by the bend and shut off his engine. He said he wanted to listen for deer before stepping out. What he heard instead was nothing at all. No wind, no insects, just the faint creak of wood traveling downhill, like a house settling where no house should have been heard from that distance. He waited longer than he meant to. When he finally turned the key, the sound returned all at once, too much of it. Leaves rustled. A dog barked far off. The spell broke, but the feeling didn't. He drove home without looking back and never stopped there again. Word spread in pieces. Quiet once. A woman hanging laundry noticed her line sway when the air was still. A boy counting fireflies lost count because the dark kept shifting. These weren't shared at the store or after church. They came out while shelling beans, while mending harnesses. Moments where truth slips through because hands are busy. People adjusted. Lanterns stayed lit longer. Radios murmured into the night. Not for music, but company. You didn't whistle after dark anymore. You didn't answer if someone called your name from the trees. There was a night everyone remembered, though no one described it the same way. A front moved in fast, clouds stacking low and heavy. Thunder rolled, but never quite broke. The air felt metallic, sharp on the tongue. As darkness settled, the valley went quiet again, deeper this time, heavier. Some swear they heard movement near the far house. Not voices, not shouting, just the sound of pacing, back and forth, steady as a clock. Others recall a light blinking on and off from an upstairs window, though no one remembered that house having a second floor. A family closer to town gathered on their porch, watching the ridge. The mother pulled her children inside and barred the door without explaining why. Her husband stood a moment longer, listening. Later, he would say he felt watched, not by eyes, but by attention. When the storm finally broke, rain came down hard and sudden, flattening dust and washing sound away. By morning, the creek had risen, trails were muddied, and the night felt like something that had passed. But the change lingered. From then on, people spoke of the hills as if they were awake. Not angry, not alive in any way you could argue with, just aware. Generational silence settled in deeper grooves. Parents didn't need to warn their children anymore. The children already knew. Somewhere beyond the bend, the house stood, unchanged. And on certain nights, when the valley went still, folks swore the quiet wasn't empty at all, but crowded. The house never sat right on the land. That was the first thing people noticed, though they didn't have words for it then. Most homes in these mountains lean into the slope, shoulder to shoulder with the hill, as if asking permission to stay. This one stood apart, squared off against the grade, its back turned to the ridge. No porch swing, no rocking chairs worn smooth, just walls that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. It had been built quick, locals said, with lumber hauled in after dark and work finished before dawn. No raising day, no neighbors lending hands. When the roof went on, no one remembered hearing hammers. Only the dull, patient knock of wood meeting wood, measured and unhurried. The kind of sound that travels farther at night. In daylight, it looked ordinary enough. 2 stories, weathered siding, windows that caught the sky and gave nothing back. But people passing by felt the pull to look away, like staring too long might invite something. The yard stayed clear of toys. No tracks lingered after rain. Even weeds seemed unsure where to grow. Once, a delivery man tried to bring supplies up the drive. He didn't make it past the gate. Later, he said the air felt thick, like breathing through cloth, and the farther he went, the more he felt watched. Not threatened, assessed. He left the boxes where they were and never returned. Folks began to say the house didn't like visitors. Not in a way that could be argued. In a way that made sense without explanation. You learn to trust those instincts here. They keep you alive longer than pride. There were small signs, too. Nails rusted faster on that side of the valley. Glass clouded no matter how often it was cleaned. On cold mornings, frost clung to the roof long after the sun hit everything else. A man cutting across the lower trail once noticed his shadow bending the wrong direction as he passed the place, though he laughed it off later, uneasy with the memory. Children sensed it most clearly. They avoided the line where the woods thickened near the yard. Games rerouted without discussion. If a ball rolled downhill, it stayed there. When asked why, they shrugged. The answer lived somewhere below language. No one remembers exactly when people stopped referring to it by address. It became that house, spoken softly or not at all. Directions shifted. Stories ended early. The mountains seemed to close ranks around it, funneling wind and sound away, as if agreeing to help. At night, lantern glow from its windows didn't flicker like other homes. It held steady, too steady. Once, someone passing late swore the light dimmed as they neared, then brightened again when they turned back. The house, it seemed, knew where you were. Years later, when the first official complaint was filed, noise, lights, movement after midnight, it went nowhere. Paperwork stalled. Calls weren't returned. The valley understood before the law ever did. Some structures shelter life. Others collect it. And that house, standing against the slope, had begun to collect more than it gave back. Authority moves differently in the mountains. It doesn't arrive with sirens so much as it drifts in, measured, cautious, aware that it's a guest on land older than any badge. When concern finally reached town, formal, written, unavoidable, it came wrapped in careful language. Lights at odd hours, sounds without source, trespass complaints from people who swore they never crossed the line. The first to go was a deputy who knew the roads by feel. He parked at the bend and walked the rest, boots sinking into damp leaves. He didn't reach the house. Halfway up, he stopped, listening to the quiet pressing around him. Later, he would say it felt like standing in a church after everyone's gone, still, heavy, expectant. He turned back without knocking, logged it as no contact. A preacher tried next. Not sent, volunteered. He carried no Bible in his hands, said the words lived better in the mouth. He walked the drive at dusk, lantern swinging, breath fogging. From the road, someone watched him pause at the steps, tilt his head as if listening. The lantern dimmed once. Then he left. No prayer offered. No blessing attempted. He told the congregation only that some places aren't ready for words. After that, help arrived only when asked directly, and even then, it hesitated. Files stayed thin. Notes contradicted themselves. Names went missing. It wasn't sabotage. It was reluctance. The kind that settles in when experience tells you to stop pushing. The sheriff came once, years later, during a stretch of uneasy nights. He drove up alone, radio off, headlights cutting a pale path through trees. At the gate, he stepped out and stood for a long moment, hands on his hips, listening to the hills breathe. When he returned to the car, he didn't look angry or afraid. He looked tired. He told no one what he heard, or didn't, just that the valley would be better served by distance. The report closed itself. Church elders spoke quietly among themselves. Not about evil, not about curses, about consent, about the difference between invitation and intrusion. When the subject of a blessing came up, it passed without vote. Silence counted as agreement. From then on, the house existed outside the reach of both law and faith. Not defiant, just untouched. People adjusted again, as they always had. Boundaries hardened. Stories shortened. Children learned new routes home. On certain evenings, when the wind slid down the ridge just right, you could hear the bell from the town church carry farther than it should, until it reached that bend and stopped. Sound, like authority, knew where to end. Some said the mountains had chosen. Others said the house had. Most said nothing at all. In places like this, refusal can be a kind of wisdom. And once it takes hold, it's passed down like anything else worth keeping. Children learn the rules before they learn the reasons. In the valley, those rules came packaged in ordinary warnings. Don't wander after dark, stay where you're seen. Come home when the light changes. No one mentioned the house by name. They didn't have to. The lessons bent around it, shaped by it, like water around stone. Kids grew up fast here, not because life was hard, but because attention was survival. They noticed when adults stopped mid-sentence. They learned which questions earned a look instead of an answer. Curiosity didn't disappear, it learned how to hide. Some swore they heard a woman humming from the trees near the ridge, a tune too old to place. Others remembered the smell, cold iron and damp wood, when the wind came from the wrong direction. A boy once brought home a pocket knife he didn't recognize, swearing he'd found it by the creek. His father buried it behind the shed and burned the gloves he wore to do it. School buses rerouted without explanation. Field trips avoided the back roads. When snow fell heavy and tracks led toward that side of the valley, parents counted heads twice. The mountains were beautiful, they said. They were also not forgiving. What stayed with the children most wasn't fear, it was responsibility. Keep watch. Don't draw attention. If you see something you can't explain, come home and say nothing. Silence wasn't taught as obedience. It was taught as care. Years later, grown and gone, some of those children tried to explain it to outsiders. They struggled. Words felt thin. How do you describe a feeling that raised you? That taught you which paths were safe by the way your chest tightened when you stepped wrong? A few returned, drawn back by funerals or the slow pull of memory. They drove past the bend and felt it again, the pressure, the listening quiet. The house stood farther back now, trees grown thick, lines softened. But the land still knew. It always does. One woman said she dreamt of the valley whenever she heard wind through open windows. Not nightmares, just presence. Another admitted he never learned to whistle, said it felt like calling something that didn't need inviting. The youngest generation grew up with fragments, stories without endings, rules without origin. That's how inheritance works when the truth is too heavy to carry whole. You pass down what fits in the hand. And still, the ridge remains. The house remains. Not active, not silent, just there, holding what it was given. In Appalachia, children don't grow out of caution. They grow into it. It becomes a sense, like weather in the bones. A reminder that some lessons are learned once, early, and never unlearned at all. Time moves differently in the mountains. Not slower, exactly, but it layers. Years fold over decades, and decades compress into memory like leaves pressed between pages. The house remained, unchanged outwardly, while the valley around it evolved. Roads were paved, new families arrived, technology crept in. Yet the bend, the ridge, the quiet, they held their old rhythm. Some newcomers saw only the picturesque view. Rolling hills, ridges fading into mist, streams snaking silver under the sun. They didn't notice the oddities at first. The way the woods seemed thicker near that side, the sudden hush that fell when the wind shifted, or the subtle hesitation in the locals' voices when giving directions. Ignorance can be bliss until it isn't. Visitors would pass and comment on the quaint, old house without seeing what lingered in its shadow. A man taking photographs caught glimpses in his lens that weren't there when he looked directly. Flickers of movement, reflections where glass shouldn't exist. He shrugged, unsettled, and left the film undeveloped. Later, he said nothing, and the memory faded into silence. The house became a silent legend, stitched into the fabric of the valley. Children now told their own versions. A door that creaks though no one enters, lantern light that sways despite no wind, shadows that stretch too long in the evening sun. Older residents would smile faintly, lips pressed, hands busy, giving nothing away. They'd learned long ago that some truths are safer folded inside, like a blade in cloth. Even the weather seemed to honor the place. Snow fell heavier along the ridge. Mist lingered longer. The wind twisted, carrying whispers that seemed familiar but distant. You could drive past and feel it, though nothing was visible. The land, after all, remembers more than people ever will. Law enforcement no longer tried. Preachers didn't visit. Curiosity became its own warning. Those who lingered too long felt the pull to leave. Not with threats, not with fear, but with the quiet insistence that some boundaries are better left untested. The house, the ridge, the valley, they were teaching patience. Watching, waiting, and still it waits. Not for drama, not for spectacle, but for life to pass and memory to accumulate. A hidden Appalachian story, secretive and stubborn, as patient as the hills themselves. By now, the house was no longer just a house. It was a pulse in the valley, subtle but undeniable. Locals referred to it with hushed respect, as if speaking its name too loudly might wake something that didn't need waking. The ridge seemed to lean toward it, trees arching like guardians. Fog rolled around the structure in shapes that made no sense, yet somehow felt intentional. Even the most skeptical visitors felt it. A couple camping near the creek spoke of a faint glow in the upstairs window, though the lights were off. Their dog refused to enter the clearing. They packed quietly, leaving behind supplies they hadn't even unpacked and never returned. The air seemed thicker there, charged with something unspoken, a sense that observation itself was recorded, stored, remembered. The elders say that in Appalachia, silence is a language. That house spoke it fluently. Those who listened learned that some stories were too heavy for words. They existed in subtle shifts. The way the wind halted mid-breath, the way shadows lingered after sunset, the way footsteps sometimes fell out of rhythm with their owners. Generations grew and passed, but the land kept it secret. A child born near the valley might never enter that bend, guided by instinct rather than instruction. A traveler might cross the ridge once and never return, drawn away by a pull they couldn't name. And the house remained, quiet, unyielding, absorbing everything, revealing nothing. Some nights, locals swear they hear a lullaby drifting from the windows. Not sorrowful, not joyful, just persistent, a reminder that history lives here in ways the eyes cannot see. And the mountains themselves seem to breathe around it, as if the story belongs as much to them as to the people who lived, observed, and eventually left. Somewhere beyond the last porch light, where the hills fold into each other and the night gets thicker than smoke, the ridge still waits. The house may be gone. The family may be nothing but a memory stitched into old fears, but the land remembers. It always does. And if you ever find yourself driving through a quiet Appalachian valley long after midnight, slow down. Listen, the wind up there carries more than cold air. It carries stories, footsteps, and a warning older than the road beneath you. Because some places never let go of what they claim. And some families never leave, even when everyone else believes they should. Stay curious. Stay cautious. And whatever you do, don't follow the sound if it calls your name. The Appalachian Mountains hide more than scenic views. They hide truths most are too afraid to face.